to Crypto OGs.
Welcome to Crypto OGs. Today in this cold weather in Dubai, we have a very special guest, an OG of crypto since 2009. Steve, welcome to the show. Pleasure to have you in Dubai.
Thank you.
All the way from Cyprus.
You got it. Yeah.
So let's dive in straight away. Now, Steve, you were top 8 to the US delegate at the United Nations on Trade, mentored by architects of the petrodollar, that's an interesting topic, and Bretton Woods too. And now you are building a sports DeFi platform. So how you ended up here? How the journey?
Yeah, it's an odd journey. I mean, I started as a Canadian country boy in Calgary, Alberta.
Nice.
Up towards the mountains. So from there, my father was in oil and gas. He was one of the pioneers in the tar sands, which is basically oil in the dirt that we have up in northern Canada. So he built an engineering company, figured out, him and many other brilliant engineers figured out how to extract the oil out of the dirt profitably. And that turned into a huge asset, which is why Trump now wants Alberta, because it's full of oil. And so when I was 13, my father retired and he moved to Washington, D.C. in 1980. This is the time when, the computer was the Time magazine person of the year. This was personal computer, so
it's like AI at the time. Oh, wow.
It was such a big deal, right? And I was 12 or 13 at the time, but I vividly remember these times. And he wanted to create a hardware and a software company. So he wanted to go into that area. So we moved into Washington, D.C., the belly of the beast, where I was thrown into that city. And when you're thrown into that city as a Canadian country boy, it's an odd experience to make that kind of cultural change. Plus, I was younger than my peers because I started school early. I was skipped a grade. Then and so I was 2 years younger than everybody else. It was really rough.
Because you were the kid.
I was a little kid, when you're 12 and everybody's 14,
that's
it's even worse, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
They're taller. Yes.
Especially the girls. They're
super
maturing
tall.
faster. I was like the little brother of all these girls. And it kept me out of trouble, I guess, which was good. But so I ended up in Washington, D.C. And that's a city that is amazing in a way, but it's not a place that you feel like home. It's a transient city. I joke if you're on a long distance plane from some city to another and you're from New York City, the person next to you says, "Hey, I'm from New York." You talk, you bond. If the person is from Washington, D.C. next to you ask to move seats.
Really?
Well, I'm just kidding. But
you know what happened to me once? I was coming back from the UK to Dubai and I was talking to the person next to me. She worked for the FCA. And I'm a crypto guy. Imagine I didn't mention any word about crypto.
Okay. Yeah. So basically I was, really focused on sports when I was young, and I didn't pay much attention in school. And but some people, in that city, it's full of very, very sharp people. There's a lot of, they're printing the money there. Literally printing the money. It's huge budgets. So many talented people get attracted to that city, and essentially some people around me figured out that they suspected I had some sort of talents that I didn't quite see. At that time, some sort of intellectual talents, which I didn't actually believe that I had any sort of, because I was a terrible student. And so one of the guys who singled me out and said, I want you to work for me, was the guy who was the U.S. delegate to the United Nations on international trade. And this was back in the days and he was one of the world's top experts on letters of credit. So he hired me to work for him when I was in college. And
kind of like intern. Yes.
Yeah. Well, but, because yes, but it was a pretty big role though, because I was actually, writing, part of the letter of credit update that, all the top banks were reading these journals. And when the lawyers were too drunk at the UN to proceed, because I don't drink parts of the UCP 500 when I was 19, because all the lawyers were out in the Irish bars in New York, so I got thrown into the deep end of seeing a different kind of a world. And that same guy talked me into going to law school, which I never wanted to go to law school, but he talked me into it. I figured I didn't know what else I was going to do, so I went to law school. And I focused a bit on the intellectual property side of law. And I did really well with that. And I found other great mentors. I mean, I was really mentored by just incredible people. And that's where you learn, people who, the guy who hired me in law was Yale, top of his class at Harvard, White House.
It's like watching a movie about lawyers, finance,
Yeah.
They have Harvard, all of these big universities, MIT.
Yeah.
So you were part of the real movie.
Yeah. It was really networking with these brilliant, incredible people and learning a lot from them. And just, I'm like, again, the little kid from Canada, just observing my environment, getting thrown from experience to experience, learning as I was going along. And they all identified somehow I had some way to make big contributions, but I didn't feel that I did discover later what it is that I have that, gives me some kind of my gift or my edge to make contributions. Then I was a lawyer hotshot young lawyer for a little while. And then I became, when I was 25, I think I was the general counsel of a software company, 300-person software company. And when I was 26, I founded a software company. So I got bored and I thought, smart guys are the business guys. I'm working at 9 p.m. at on Friday night, 9 p.m. on Friday night to save either write a contract for the clients or to save from disaster that they've put themselves into.
Yeah.
They're paying you a lot of money, but they're at the golf course from noon. And I thought, who's the clever ones? These guys, they're playing golf, they're working less hours, their business is much better. It's better to be in business than to be fighting with another lawyer who's also up at 9 in the evening on Friday night working and stressing out, and I wanted to get into business. So I created a software company and that company was quite successful. It was extremely boring stuff. It was association management software, which, big membership associations like American Association of Pediatrics, they have software systems to run all the accounting, the membership management, their dues. And really, we were the first people. So I was one of the first people to convert that kind of software into internet web-based systems, which sounds silly now because everything runs that way. But I think I specifically remember we were in the first 6 people to be doing this. We knew who the other people who were building web-based software were. None of us, the frameworks weren't even mature. We were talking to each other, trying to just hack through the jungle. How do we do it? So I was on the cutting edge of, really Web 2 back in those days. Very boring stuff.
It's boring. Actually, I studied telecommunications engineer. So I studied all of this at uni. The OC model, all the ports, TCP, IP, ATA. It's boring, but you need to learn them.
Yeah, it's very good background. All this background information, that I've accumulated even since 1980 from the PC, because I would tag along with my father when he would travel to California in 1981. And I remember meeting legends of the industries when there were just 20 guys in a little office, and they later became, big Silicon Valley companies. So I was active, I was paying attention to my dad's business there when I was young. I was observing a lot of things. So you get to see a lot of trends and changes, and they bear similar cycles. These cycles that happen like AI. These cycles have happened before, just in different contexts. The dynamics are similar, and then there are some differences. But you get a great experience. But I ultimately created a software company, and then I exited out of that in the 90s. And then found myself, still young with a lot of energy, going, okay, now what? I had accomplished all my checkbox goals that I thought would take a lifetime. It happened very, very fast. And so I was thinking, what can I do? I helped some inner city kids back then did computer training.
Is that in Silicon or in Washington?
This was in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and Silver Spring, Maryland. And they had kind of the orphans program on the inner city. These kids had tremendous talents, but they didn't really have any mentors and they didn't have computers. So I actually would buy them computers and teach them how to use computers and do some sort of virtual, coaching, mental coaching, like trying to tell them, hey, you can do it. Because so some of these kids were so brilliant, but they didn't have a mentor. So, when I grew up, my father was very successful. So, as a kid, you always assume your dad is an idiot. Like every 13-year-old think their dad's an idiot, right?
Yeah.
So you're like, well, my dad's an idiot and he's created this big company, so this can't be that hard. So you assume you can do it. Whereas if you grow up in an inner city and you don't have any peer in your group and you haven't seen that, you don't assume that you can do it. And it's simply a mental barrier. And so I would coach them. And I really enjoyed that because that was a complete break from the crazy rat race of all the stuff I had working so hard before. And then I started to code myself. And I got manic into coding, and I became an extremely good coder. And so I transitioned myself really from, intellectual property lawyer. Then I was a CEO of a software company, and then I was coding. And I found that very empowering because it's essentially the ability to just type words and make programs that the whole world can access. This is an incredible thing when you think about that,
Yes,
right?
it
That
is.
you can just sit there and type and create whatever you're dreaming, and the world could access that. And so I found that intoxicating and exhilarating, and I got completely obsessed into it.
Good. We were talking about this before we jump in here. We're talking about AI and how we become obsessed with new technologies. And before I start to talk about your new venture, let's talk about the monetary system. So let's go back a little bit because obviously you went from lawyer to coder, but you've been very attached to the monetary system since young age, right? We talk about petrodollar and everything else. But what do you see inside the traditional monetary system that made you think something needs to change?
So I've always been a thinker about that. I remember conversations with my father where I'd question the dynamics of the stock market and say, is this just a big Ponzi? Because how does it turn into cash eventually? You're just gambling on a price going up. And he said, no, it's not. He couldn't quite explain it to me.
Yeah.
But I've always been a bit of a prober into things to see how is this system working?
Yes.
What's really going on? What's the guy behind the curtain doing? How is this thing running? And I didn't like how the money system is running, and I didn't like it from the 80s on. And so I was always looking for other ways that a money system could run. So I was thinking about those things even a decade before Bitcoin, and networking with people that were thinking the same way. And some of those people went on to be prominent in different parts of the crypto ecosystem. There was just a cabal of thinkers, and some of them were technical, some of the great technical people. I just had the privilege of meeting one of the great architects, Emin, the founder of Avalanche.
Okay.
He was one of the first people actually building blockchains, even, pre-Satoshi. Nick Szabo, who was, the architect of, I don't know him, but the architect of smart contracts, 20 years before Ethereum. So, there were people thinking about these things, talking about these things, but all the people who were doing that, like, we were nerdy, weird people.
They were not philosophers, and they didn't think the way that, like, freedom.
There wasn't as much. There were more technical people, and the philosophers. There were some thinkers and philosophers, but that's like an area where I think I have a little bit of an edge, thinking about it philosophically, because if you go to the philosophy of value and money, what is money? And most people get it wrong right away, is why most people couldn't understand Bitcoin. That we don't understand that. And I live in Cyprus these last 25 years. So I got this and I really loved, and I studied Greek history in university as well. I have a great affinity for Greek culture, but the idea of, democratized politics, you could have democratized money as well. And money is simply a measuring tape, it doesn't have an inherent value. And this is still a very big struggle for people to understand the humanistic standpoint that whatever we place our attention and our focus on, those are the things that inherit value, and they don't have value to us if we don't place our attention on them. We create the value. Then we create the money to measure the value. That's the measuring tape. The money, something like the land, is the value. We create the value in the land, because if you and I want that piece near the beach, if we don't, what value does that have if nobody wants that? If you and I both want that same piece of land, now it starts to gain value. And then we create a measuring tape to measure the value we created. That's a secondary layer. So it's difficult for people to imagine this is how it is. And there are people with other opinions, but it does make logical sense when you explain it to people. Like, if there's only 3 of us on the planet, what matters is barter. You have chickens, I have cheese, this guy can climb trees and get coconuts. And then if we wanted to develop a money system that we measure that value with shells, this is all our choice. Yeah. This is all about us. And so I realized that, the mechanism of how money was created and is very, very dangerous. Also, with having worked with people who were architects of the petrodollar system. This is the first utility coin. I don't think people quite understood what that was. The dollar was backed by gold, allegedly, Fort Knox, or at least we had the perception that there's gold backing this. And There must have been to some degree. And then it shifted to a utility system, which is you need the dollar. The utility, the almost exclusive utility of the dollar was to buy oil. And that utility was enforced by force of war. So I'm not saying that's good. It's a model of utility. That's created a war machine, though. You know, and then that succeeded as a model. Now it's failing because they overprinted. You know, they just kept printing and printing, which is simply diluting your value. If you and I form a company and you have 50 shares and I have 50 shares, but I have the ability to print more shares, and we have a restaurant chain. So, you know, the value, if I tell you every year I'm printing more shares, giving it to myself and my friends, and you're keeping your same 50 shares, but I'm saying, why are you complaining? You bought your shares for $50 and now they're worth 60. Well, they would have been worth 6 million if I hadn't diluted your value. Yeah. And we don't understand that we're being completely robbed, really, that we're all millionaires right now, based on the productivity level of the modern world, the technological productivity and the human productivity, we're all millionaires. And if you look in the ancient Greece, they used to work 10 hours per week. Once they moved to the cities and they developed the farming techniques, you don't need to work 70-hour weeks anymore. The luxury of wealth is time.
Yes, it is.
So they would sit around eating grapes and talking about philosophy.
Playing golf in the modern age.
Exactly. And that's what we had, the golden age of Western civilization, was as a direct result of the productivity gain that came from moving from chasing deer through the woods to farming and productive systems. Then if you want to work 90 hours a week, you can still do it, but you don't have to. You can live a life of a millionaire with 10 hours per week, and then you can work on high arts and time, and you can build the Parthenon and you know, these world-changing things. So we're trapped in a very bad system, and I've been painfully aware of it pretty much my whole life, adult, even from 13 years old on. I knew there's something very wrong with the systems that are running. So that's but seeing how the actual petrodollar was running and how the Bretton Woods system is actually running, then I got firsthand visibility that most people didn't get, to actually get my head right into it and go, wow, this is dark. This is heavy. It's a very powerful system. It's a very intelligent system. But I saw we could be doing this many, many other ways.
And back then, when you were understanding about all of this, the petrodollar and everything else, there were no books. There was nothing talking about it.
That's right. Like you're talking like pre-internet, right? Yeah. You could go to a local library and some sort of crazy conspiracy guy would be holding a seminar with 8 other weird people in the back, right? And you don't want to be seen with them. There's some strange book on shelf 11. Yeah, there wasn't really
nothing
information like how we have now. Yeah,
now it's totally different. And now let's dive a little bit into the sports betting. I know we're going to move like quantum leaps here right now from petrodollar to sports betting, but you coined performance investing, right? As an alternative to sports betting. So what's the difference between those two?
Okay. So it's funny because, you know, you were asking me, you know, how does that transition happen where you go from this kind of economic philosopher to getting into sports performance and cryptocurrency assets? And they're actually very closely aligned.
Okay.
And so, however, let's talk about sports betting. Sports betting is something completely different. Sports betting is, you know, again, what I consider, you know, a bad model, like an exploitive model. I'm not judging anybody who's in sports betting. It's just you call it a zero-sum model. So it's a guaranteed capital destruction mathematically if you participate in that model. And even because there's no wealth creation, it's simply a fixed pool of money. Yeah. Somebody wins, somebody loses. And a betting company's revenue would be the losses of the participants. And there cannot be a case where they both win. So I don't like models like that, where somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. That's the musical chairs model of the modern. That's exactly the model that we are wanting to break. You know, we want to create productive wealth systems where we both win.
Okay.
And those are hard. That takes great thinking. That takes a lot of work. Bitcoin was an example of a wealth generating idea.
Yeah.
And so sports betting is something I'm not a fan of. And however, it is something, if you break it down again philosophically, what is really happening? Why are people betting in sports? They like to lose money.
Yes.
I think some do like the adrenaline of making the experience of watching the game intense because you've got more riding on it. So I do understand that. But generally, people don't like to lose money and have problems where they can't buy diapers for their kids at the end of a month because they've lost it in sports betting. This is not a good thing. But what it is they know and love everything about sports And therefore, they want to monetize their knowledge about what they know and what they love, because they don't understand about stocks. So this is not a passion for them. What they understand about is their own social and local environment and things. I would venture to say there are half of Colombia knows more about football and the teams than Wall Street knows about stocks.
It's true. Yeah.
Their level of knowledge is intense because it's of deep, deep passion. And so when but the people are only presented one model, which is the exploitive zero-sum mafia model of betting. Vague, the whole thing is mafia-esque, right?
It is, yeah.
And it's okay, but there should be another model. And I saw it as, if you want to reach people with new economic models, Bitcoin is very abstract. It's now reached Wall Street. It's a big success. But how do you reach the hearts and minds of hundreds of millions, billions of people who don't understand any of those concepts and cannot relate to these complex theories and cannot understand how can a digital thing have a value? What is all this economic theory? What are all these crypto guys talking about? But, they're the value as well. If they're not included in that system, that wealth is being tapped into the old system. How do you bring those people? So, you got to go close to their heart and to what they know and they love, and that's sports. So actually, that's what I targeted with the sport exchange. And the idea is to have a model where it's the predictive thing is still, everything is in life is predictive, right? All our decisions are making on predicting a path, right? So the prediction is innate to all our behavioral patterns. And even things like Polymarket and Kalshi, those predictions markets are still close to the betting model. They're mostly almost zero-sum models. There's a small trading element. There's no permanent asset creation. There's no wealth effect.
Yeah.
So they're still, I'm not saying bad things about them. They're still very good and interesting, but they're very different than an asset model. So I wanted to create an asset model that could be relatable to the masses, where they could own the value they create and they could trade it based on their actual knowledge. So that's where
sports of the people that's playing the sports as well, right?
Yeah. So the asset is basically made out of human energy, because everybody, when I talk about that subject, everybody also gets to, well, where does the value come from? That's a philosophical question, isn't it? And
yes,
that goes back to everything we just said. It's like, well, where does value come from?
And it's very exciting. And you see this kind of situation in, let's say, in the Premier League or in Latin America. People get so passionate about a sport or about a team or about a player that they just clash against each other in a social media post. They go crazy. People go crazy. But walk us through the mechanics of what you're creating. Like, for example, talking about fans. Let's say a Liverpool or a Corinthians fans opens the new exchange for sports. What happens when they buy or when they do something? How are the mechanics?
Okay, so the fundamental mechanics are, first, create a permanent asset that is related to both the fan enthusiasm, I call it the socioeconomic passion value. That's again, back to our philosophical discussion. That is, passion is monetizable. That's what we call business models, where you find somebody wants something and you find a way to create a model of money coming from that. Or you could also find the same thing on physical assets, usually naturally scarce. So you're dealing with an abstract, people think that passion is not real value, but I'm saying that it is. So if you harness it into a physical asset that is scarce and digital, and you could now buy that, and then if you synthetically tether it to the performance so that it has some relationship to performance, for example, a stock is related to both the net book value of a company, what are its assets worth, how much cash does it have if you liquidated it, and its financial performance on revenue and the prospects of whether that will be going up or down over time. It brings in the knowledge, right? I studied the markets. I know that, I'm just saying, somebody could say NVIDIA is going up or down based on these trends and these markets and their management and these financials. And this, it's a very complex analysis to make a prediction on whether a stock will be going up or down over time. That's very different legally than a bet, which is what'll happen on Sunday, transient, no permanent value, win or lose, payout on the odds. A completely different model. So, we create a digital asset for each sports team in the world, scarce. So you can buy and sell this asset in what looks like a stock market kind of an interface. And one of the really interesting things is because this value is created by the fans, it's not owned by the teams, it's not owned by us, you can pay it forward with the liquidity and the value.
Okay.
So the first buying, the money doesn't go to the company or the protocol. It actually goes into back the liquidity of what you're buying.
Okay.
So they call that word nerdy, endogenous liquidity is what it means, into the system, because all the buys are creating the liquidity. And then part of that money is routed at the protocol to the performance pool. Now, performance pool means just, let's say there's been $1 million of buying, of cash buying of these digital asset we're talking about. A percentage, in this case, would be $300,000, would be locked in a smart contract. And slowly over time, the mandate of that smart contract is slowly over time buy all the teams in the league proportional to how well they're doing on the table. So that if each day there's amount of buying. So if a team is moving up the table over a season or over a decade or whatever, they're getting a higher allocation because it buys based on more of the top team, less of the second, and the least of the bottom of the table.
Okay.
So that becomes like a whale with a protocol saying, I'm going to buy every day based on how well they're doing. And that drives demand. And that creates what you call a synthetic tether of, so now this asset is performance linked asset backed with endogenous liquidity, which is, I like to teach people new words, not to try to show off words. It's a good thing where the utility is native into this. Because with no liquidity, you have no marketplace, right?
Yeah.
And that's the struggle with most cryptos, with a lot of stocks,
that's what
with
happened
NFTs.
the last 4 months.
Yeah, I don't think people understand the scale of this. Like if you mathematically calculate approximately, rough math, fuzzy math, how much money went in to Bitcoin and stayed in Bitcoin for Bitcoin to go from where it was in 2009 to where it is today, I think it would be somewhere around $150 billion of cash went in and stayed in. So if you remove $70 billion out of the market, you have crushed it. You know, not ended it. You've set it back severely. And there are people that, you know, I could walk you through all the dynamic. I don't want to do that. It's boring. But there are people that can understand these dynamics, and they're on the dark side. Okay. And, you know, mostly there's nobody on our side articulating these things. But that hits heavy, and we all felt this for the last, 6 months. It's been a heavy, heavy blow on the industry.
And now you migrate to different industries. You migrate now to gold and silver.
Yes.
So yesterday was like the bigger liquidation.
That's true, but still they're net way up, right? Yeah. And so the problem is that it's because crypto is still not relatable to people. We're not only down, but it's harder for us to recover because we need the other 6 billion people to be able to participate. We do have Wall Street's participation, but that's coming at the cost of centralization, quasi-centralization. So we need these models. So you can see like the ethos of what we're doing at the Sport Exchange is very deeply rooted in the crypto ethos and in a kind of freedom thinking, saying it's got to be a more relatable way for people to participate in this new kind of economic theory that Bitcoin represented. And there's a lot more in common with what we're doing in Bitcoin, because at first it looks like, a sport exchange where first people try to assume that must be gambling because we're so used to the only way you can make money from your knowledge of sports is gambling. It's hard-coded in our thinking that is not the only model. We created the alternative. And that is a lot more in common with the dynamics of Bitcoin than it does with gambling. It's more like the stock and Bitcoin combined into a relatable model for normal people who don't want to know all this theory. They just know.
They just want to go and click.
Yeah, because in the end of the day, nobody should really care about blockchain per se, the same way we don't care about the internet. You don't go into the store and go, or apps are like, which of these are internet-enabled apps? It's just, what can they do for you? And if the nature of the application is better on the internet or better on the blockchain, then it should be on the blockchain or be on the internet. Yeah. But that shouldn't be like a topic we talk about.
We talk about how internet works.
We don't talk about what chip is in your cares. Nobody cares. It needs a chip. There's a chip, right? Yeah. And now what can it do for me? And why should I have this one versus the other one? So we got to get up here to where people live.
And then obviously sports is something that everybody's attached. There's so much passion about it. The most followed person on social media is a sports person, like Ronaldo, for example, right?
Yeah. I think probably top 9 out of 20 are football.
Yeah, football,
Right?
Ronaldo, Messi, but also in TikTok everywhere, right? And
Yeah.
everywhere that you go, there's pictures. I was in Buenos Aires recently, and it's Messi everywhere. So it's like more than the president, right?
True.
But now something that's very interesting is how they're moving the planet right now. So there is just 2 events in the year. Well, every 4 years and once every year. One is the Super Bowl, but the real one is the final of the World Cup.
Yeah.
That stops everything, right? Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter what language you speak, doesn't matter who is playing. And I think so Avalanche is working with FIFA. I don't know. I think so they're working with FIFA and the next one.
Yeah, Avalanche is working with FIFA in the sense that FIFA is also using Avalanche to create their own layer 1.
Okay.
Yeah, and
But you are creating your own Avalanche layer 1, right?
yeah.
And create a Web3 abstraction layer so it feels like Web 2. That's very important. So why was that critical? So it feels like Web 2.
Yeah, exactly. So we're using Avalanche because if you're going to really bring hundreds of millions of people, which everybody's talking about in crypto for a long time, but where's the next billion people? You need a lot of scale, and you know we believe Avalanche is really the best framework for us to have this level of scale. And then the second part, what was the second part of your question?
The second part is like, it feels like Web 2.
Oh yeah. So,
Yeah.
So with the Web 2, yeah, it's like we were saying, it doesn't really matter. No, like, well, we should really flush all those words, you know, down the drain.
Yes.
Because really blockchain, you know, and internet, these systems will start to blend. Use the blockchain for the appropriate parts of blockchain, which is like holding money and trust and contracts, and use the internet for the other parts. You could call that Web 4, but I just don't like the whole genre of wording because it's very confusing. But certainly I don't want to have to operate MetaMask in order to participate in a blockchain-based interface. There has to be abstraction layers, not wallets created in the background. And that's what we do, and create abstraction layers so that when you log in, you could log in with Gmail or other different mechanisms, or if you want to do it with MetaMask or whatever. But that shouldn't be a prerequisite. You will just experience it like it's a Web 2, but it is creating in the background a non-custodial wallet that is being operating on your behalf there through your instructions. Otherwise, you leave out almost everybody from participation.
It's true. And now sports is just your first vertical about what you're building, but also you mentioned gold, energy, social reputation. Like, what's the bigger vision for Pandacy? And explain everybody what is Pandacy.
Okay, so Pandacy is the kind of layer 1 that we have on Avalanche of our master company.
Okay.
That is going to be putting out many, many products in this space. The first of which is the sport exchange.
Okay.
And the kind of the etymology and the history on that word, one of my good friends who is an Olympic downhill skier, Jan Hudek, he was the men in tights straight down the hill, right?
Yes.
Yeah, these guys are fascinating, amazing. That sport is really under-monetized. You know, the 100 million people would watch him and the other 15, 20 top guys race every weekend on television in Europe, and Canada and US would watch them. But the amount of money they make is really, really small. And he's a guy with a heart of gold. So he's from Calgary. He's from the Czech Republic, but they escaped communism in a boat, went to Canada when he was young. And when I was back in Canada, I moved back there in 2012 for a year. I met him, and he kind of understood that, you know, I have that big brain. And he said, look, you can build almost anything. Can you look at doing something to help sports? And he said, for example, I'm funding athletes and competitors even because we're struggling. So I help everybody, but I only have so much money that I can help with. We need a way to regenerate this money permanently to help the sports. And his nickname was the Panda. Right. So I did a few experiments into this area of, you know, sports social networks, trying to find what's the way that they can relate to this, and what are the regenerative models, and how do we slide cryptocurrency into this world through here. So kind of in honor to him, that he was the ethos that represent the vision of helping circulate the money and the value created in sports from the passion of sports with both the athletes and the community. That was the heart of what we're doing at Pandacy. However, one of the first things that was pointed out to me by very big financial players who saw early versions of the sport exchange, they looked at it and they said, we see this will be gigantic. These are very big finance people. these are not crypto people.
Pros,
These are like guys who are managing billions and
billions,
hundreds of billions of dollars. And they said, we love what you're doing there. It's going to be a huge success. But they said, do you realize that all the things that you've built for this sport exchange are equally applicable to commodities? You could create liquid in stock. And in a way, I was like, yeah, I sort of realized that. But over this last 2 years, I've realized more and more that we do have the ability to actually use our frameworks for a lot of these assets in spectacular ways, because we create liquidity. And we also pioneered the idea of decentralized physical custody, which I don't want to, another day, we'll do a whole talk about this, right? It's a very nerdy subject, but I guess I'm the inventor of that idea, because nobody even talked about it. And we actually constructed how you can have decentralized custody of a physical asset that now allows you to have DeFi frameworks overlaying these things without centralized trust. Otherwise, the whole RWA world is trust me, bro. I've got the gold. Trust me, bro. I've got this and that. And that works to a small degree, but that is not where we want to be. So, and also, if you look at what the trend is, everybody wants to monetize everything, especially young people. There's billion people, in the world. Yeah. Think of all the young people in Europe, Indonesia, Pakistan, Asia. You're talking about 1 billion young people what is their way ahead? They don't see their path ahead, how they can ever get somewhere. So they're gambling on sports or demoralized, or, they don't have, they need
purpose. Yeah,
they need a way ahead. Like in the US, my father's generation, imagine the wages, you're earning, let's say $1,000 a year, and a house is $3,000.
Yeah, that was a good time.
Yeah, and then the real estate wealth. But this current generation has missed all that. And what happened, and where people in Europe were willing to go brave it into the wild and in a wagon into northern Canada to try to get land, because that was wealth. We have to be willing to be brave into the digital space, but people are willing to be brave and to take risks in the digital space of crypto. But we haven't given them good enough models. It can't just be meme coins and more DeFi yield farming. There have to be better frameworks where we actually offer. There's nothing against those. Those are good things. Just there has to be more and more depth. And so I think, we're looking at, again, that's the direction of the sport exchange.
So basically that will be your playbook for onboarding millions of people who never touch crypto, putting aside the crypto bros and Wall Street. So sport fans are basically the high street. Everybody will jump in, right?
Yeah. And then we will continue to provide like groundbreaking product ideas, right? Maybe like, not that we're emulating Apple Computer, but in the sense that, some great companies have one thing, but, Apple put out many great products through the years because they built a great culture of creation. They had a great inventor, a great visionary inventor, like with Steve Jobs, right? And after he's gone, they really haven't invented much, but still what they already invented was so incredible. Yeah. And we want to monetize, these young people want to monetize themselves at this point. So how can I list myself on a market, own digital value, so that you could trade and own that value? What about a flower shop in New York City that's struggling? They can't list on the New York Stock Exchange, but we could create an exchange where they could list and that they could be monetized. What about charities that are always asking for money and it's endless? They never can get, what about a regenerative mechanisms of owning part of the social value of those? So the fantasy high level thinking is how do you create new marketplaces, new digital assets, new RWA frameworks that have this dynamic of non-zero sumness, right? Where the technology layer creates wealth. Some of this is another very, very big theory on, game theory and markets and how all that dynamics work for how does a hydrofoil go faster than the wind, right? How does a bunch of metals stay in the air? A really clever combination of elements. We need this across all finance. We don't just need the old finance world to come onto the blockchain and a centralization. That's the current trend, that if we don't do it as a crypto community, Wall Street will just use the tools of blockchain with centralization and jam all the old system on top of our head. We must create the new system with this super intelligence, with this super engineering, and with this relatability to both people and relatability to Wall Street. So the ideas of, we're working on the first DeFi gold ETF where you have redemption, yield, decentralized custody, these kind of areas will be very appealing to Wall Street as well. But, the start point is the sport exchange, but you can see the vision and a lot of these other things are actually constructed. Just you have to focus at first. You've got to break through with something into the masses, and then you can bring the rest of the thing forward. Just like an artist, you gotta get your first album,
and then you
out,
go to
then you can put your other albums out.
Steve, you just replied 4 of the questions they have for you. Just what you said.
Oh, okay.
It's good. You replied already, but I have last question. I think so. This is like summarize a lot of stuff from the beginning of the podcast to right now. So if the mentors who taught you about petrodollar, Bretton Woods were here today in this room, what would you tell them about where money is heading?
Well, I think that it's obviously completely already moving on chain. Okay. And that was something that 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years ago that seemed strange, but now you cannot even deny it. So they would already know that.
Yeah.
So they already see it. And they're actually out ahead of it, to tell you the truth. They're out ahead of it. So they're out there innovating. Whereas, the whole crypto world is still confused and spinning around inside of an echo chamber, That's why I'm saying they're already forcefully moving into this new world and but they're creating it their way. Do you follow what I mean? And that's a different kind of ethos. That is not the ethos of the world that I want. Not that I don't want to judge it. They're bad people, the good people. I don't want to get into that kind of thinking. It's just, that world, I want to create a different world. That's like, we all want to see that world that they're creating isn't going to benefit those billion young people. It's going to enslave them, not because these people are evil and they want to enslave them. It's just the nature of that algorithm of musical chairs model moving into the blockchain's power, supplemented by AI. Well, this is a very bad formula. So actually, I wouldn't tell them much because they're off busy building. Do you know what I mean? They're off busy building while we're still spinning around. And that's why it's kind of urgent that we, the people would refocus into backing things that have the spark of this new vision and articulatable value propositions of how to correctly use these new tools of blockchain and this new wave of energy for the benefit of normal people.
Steve, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. I can't wait to see the sport exchange going live, and I can't wait to see you changing 1 billion lives of all these kids through sports fans. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And to all the crypto G's, don't forget to go and follow Steve and Sport Exchange. We'll put all the links below somewhere. But thank you so much again for coming, Proper Crypto G, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.